and the impact on pod pilots that spend their time in friendly HiSec. Then I'll address traveling in enemy HiSec and dealing with the enemy navy. After that, faction warfare complexes, then faction warfare missioning. After that, faction warfare roams, and I will pay particular attention to why it's very hard to get around in faction warfare if nobody knows you or your corp. After that, I will address spies and why, if you just joined faction warfare, you'll hear a lot of that. Then I'll spend some time on metagaming in faction warfare, restrictions on corporations in faction warfare, particularly the no alliance membership restriction. After that, I will address why nobody ever wins faction warfare and why nobody ever loses faction warfare. And then I'll have a rundown of corporations that are currently involved in faction warfare. So, as said, who am I? I am Kaver Linkovir. I'm currently in Autocannons Anonymous. Before I was in Autocannons Anonymous, I was in Hoplite Brigade. And as a member of Hoplite, while I was a member of Hoplite, we joined faction warfare on the Minmatar side, and we never looked back. It was very fun and very amusing, and we're still having fun. So we have no exit strategy. We'll probably stay in faction warfare until it dies out. That's about me. What I do is mainly diplomatic stuff, and I keep the corp running. This is part of a charm offensive after there were two large faction warfare corps on the Minmatar side that war decked E-UNI. That's about me. Now on to the lore backstory. The lore backstory is something I haven't really had time to research, so I'll just skip that for now. You can probably find it somewhere in all the documentation that's online about Eve and something or other. I think it had to do with some Galentian or some Caldari flying into a Galente or Caldari station, but I have no clue. I had no time to research that. The CCP framework for faction warfare is that CCP basically made two camps. On one side you have the Galente and the Minmatar, and on the other side you have the Caldari and the Amar. Those two sides are in a perpetual war deck. So the moment you join either an NPC corp that's in faction warfare or a corporation, player corporation that is in faction warfare, you are at war with the opposing two factions. That has a lot of travel restrictions and hassle that comes with that, particularly in enemy HiSec. But there are also some minor issues in friendly HiSec that I will address later on. CCP basically did this to enable people who want to fight consensually have the framework to do so. As all of you should already know, undocking in Eve means that you put your ship at risk. This goes double for you if you are in faction warfare, because there is an enemy out there and you've agreed to fight that enemy, and the enemy has agreed to fight you. In that it's reminiscent of Red v Blue, except that in contrast to Red v Blue, faction warfare has a mission structure attached to it, and also a way of gaining faction standing very rapidly by promotions. Um, it made it possible to enter consensual PvP. Now, CCP didn't stop there. They made it so that opposing HiSec would be very unfriendly to you, which cuts down your survivability in those enemy HiSecs. And enemy HiSec is the opposing faction. So if you join Minmatar or Galente faction warfare, you are restricted in your travels because the navy of Amar and Kaldari HiSec will shoot you. Now, bear in mind this is the navy. It's not gate guns. It's not Concord. And you can actually tank the navy in 0.5 systems, and I think some have managed to tank it in 0.6s. I'm not sure about that, but that means that you sometimes run into gate camps that station camps in 0.5s of your own friendly HiSec, where the other side is trying to inconvenience faction warfare players of your side. CCP put into place occupancy of certain parts of LowSec. These parts of LowSec are known as war zones. Dotlan has specific maps on the Galente and on the Galente Kaldari LowSec warfront and the Minmatar Amar warfront. In those LowSecs, you are very likely to encounter the enemy, because the enemy is enticed to go there. This means that CCP has done their darndest to make sure that you encounter the other side if you enter your own side of the LowSec warfront. They do this by a few mechanisms, chief of which, when they designed it, probably was the occupational sovereignty sub thingy. If you travel through those LowSecs, you can see occupation, and occupation is basically who has the biggest presence in that system at that moment. It's the faction's way of measuring dicks. So if you take a system, you can brag about that. That's basically all that is, because there is no other system involved with that. So if you take occupancy of a enemy system, and you can do that by missioning to make it vulnerable, by running complexes to make it vulnerable, and then taking that system. And the taking of the system is done by very boring bunker bashing. Then you can say, oh yeah, we took that system from insert your enemy of choice, and then you can say, look, we did that, we're great. But it does absolutely nothing. So I think all sides have kind of lost interest in that, except some hardcore role players. And that's essentially one of the flaws of faction warfare. Nobody's interested in bunker bashing anymore. Having said that, there are a few things that CCP did right. One of those things is the faction warfare missions, and the other thing is the faction warfare complexes. Both have been put into place to ensure that you encounter the enemy and get to fight that enemy. Complexes do this by allowing you to run those complexes, and then by running those complexes you can switch the occupancy. Now, as I said before, that isn't used very much because people don't give a fuck. What they do care about, however, is that it allows them to choose their battleground. Because some complexes have acceleration gates. Those acceleration gates are configured to allow specific ship types. So you'll have complexes that only allow smaller ships. You have complexes that allow everything, including Titans. That means that if you have a certain ship type in your as a soloist, that you can basically hang around in a complex, waiting for an enemy to arrive and to start shooting you. And you will always be certain that that enemy will never exceed a certain ship type. So if you go into a place that's configured to take only frigates, you will only be able to enter with a frigate. So if you enter with your frigate, you know that everybody that enters also has a frigate. Now, this is very good for scaling the amount of engagement that you want. Also, the way that you find those complexes is by system scanning. So you run a system scan, complexes show up, and you get to warp there. The moment you warp there, the moment you initiate warp, even if you then tell your ship to stop warping, it will show up on your overview. The moment it is on overview, everybody in that system knows that something is happening at that complex, because you just made it very clear that you're going there. The same mechanism applies to missions. Your faction warfare missions. Yes, those signatures also show up using probes. But they indeed show up without probes as well. And they'll say stuff like Amar complex or Minmatar complex or whatever. There are comprehensive lists out there about what specific complexes that there are, and also what ship types are allowed in those complexes, which is something that you want to know before you start hanging out there. If you hang out in a frigate in a complex that is configured to allow ships that are infinitely larger in, you might want to rethink that and skedaddle to a complex that's configured to allow only frigates to enter. That's also a very good way of scaling your involvement. The complexes do nothing except give you victory points as a individual player, and give your corporation victory points on a corporate level, as well as your faction. So your Minmatar faction will get victory points. Those victory points do very, very little on a corporate level, and on a yes, it's quite common for fleets to have similar composition as on ship size, so you can all enter the same kind of complexes. I'm responding to the questions as they come along. By the way, where was I? Oh yeah. Complexes. So the complexes do very little for your faction and for your corporation. But on the individual level, if you run enough complexes and rack up enough victory points, you will get a promotion. Now, promotions are great to show to everybody that you've been very busy, but they're also used to give you faction standing. So if you run a lot of complexes, you will get a promotion at some point by the faction that you are running those complexes for. So if you're Minmatar, you'll run those complexes for for the Minmatar faction, and you will get promotions within that Minmatar faction. Now the promotion goes with a Minmatar standing boost and a Amarr standing loss. So if you stay in faction warfare long enough and run a lot of complexes, you will find that even after dropping faction warfare, you're going to be an outlaw in the opposite side's space. On the is there a limit of how many ships can enter question, no, there is not. Faction warfare places are unrestricted as far as how many ships can enter. In that respect, they are the same as, say, a gated Dead Space mission thingy, in which you can also get like a huge pile-up of ships. There is no restriction on that, except a how much the node can take restriction. So if you overload the node, it'll crash, and you're basically done. But that's the only limit there is on that, as far as I know. There is no limit on how many ships can enter any given complex. On the do you get faction gains or loss by shooting faction NPC in the bunkers / complexes too? Yes. That's the short answer. Yes, you do. I was at complexes. So the complexes are just used for people that want Minmatar or Gallente or Caldari or Amarr standing and want to get there fast, or they're being used by heavy-duty role players to measure their cocks. Then, how this framework is being used at the moment. This CCP framework at the moment is being used on the Amarr Minmatar front to just shoot each other. And basically what both sides are looking for is engagements they enjoy. And sometimes that can be very blobby. Other times it's roaming gangs. Other times it's fighting for a system that one side finds very interesting and the other finds very interesting. Another thing a lot of people enjoy is the faction warfare missions and ruining missioning for the other side, which is a form of asset denial. That's how it's being used on the Amarr Minmatar front. At the moment, I don't have any guests from Gallente or Caldari front. The plan is to have people from the Caldari Gallente front at a later date to say how it's being used. They're part of the woods. The impact on pod pilots in friendly HiSec. Now, the moment you joined up with your faction and you've entered into faction warfare, that's the moment you become a target for anyone that is on the other side. Now, something that has been quite popular for a while was to hunt down people that mission, so faction warfare players that mission in their own friendly HiSec, and shoot them. Now this would be done by neutral alts scanning you down and then warping into the target's mission and then killing the target in a very fancy shiny ship. that was done with great success by a few people, including one of my former corp mates. So what he would do is he would just look for people in the most shiny of ships that are the enemy, and he would look for those on his alt. He would find them missioning in their shiny ship and warp into their mission, drain their cap while they were under the gun of the NPCs in said mission, and then shoot them. And he would try to do so before he would die himself. Now, after killing them, he would scoop their loot. This is a very specific trade within faction warfare, and a very specific crowd that did that. And I haven't heard any big gangs lately, but that might have to do with the people involved going elsewhere to do other stuff. How do you actually join faction warfare? There are two ways of joining faction warfare. Well, actually, there are three ways. The first way would be to join the military wing of the military corporation for the faction you want to do battle with. On the Minmatar side, that's Tribal Liberation Front. On Galente's side, that's the Federal Defense Union. On the Amar side, that's the 24th thingamajiggy. And on the Kaldari side, I don't know. So what you do is you, as an individual player, you join up with that NPC corporation, and the moment you're joined up in them, yes, that will be done through the Militia office. And the moment you join up with them, they see you as part of their little gang. You'll gain access to Militia chat, and you will gain access to everything that faction warfare has to offer, including the getting shot. That was option number one. So as an individual player joining the NPC corporation. Another way of joining faction warfare is to sign up with a player-owned faction warfare corporation. Yeah, State Protectorate is indeed a Kaldari thingy. I was forgetting about that, but yeah, that's State Protectorate for the Kaldari. So when you as an individual player join up with a corporation that is already engaged in faction warfare, you too will be in faction warfare the moment you're accepted. And thank you very much for linking all that in the lecture channel. So the moment you join a corporation that is in faction warfare, you too are in faction warfare. Now, the third way would be to beat a corporation, and then that corporation signs up for faction warfare. So, if you're in a corporation that is not yet in faction warfare, and that corporation joins faction warfare, you too will be in faction warfare. So, if you're ever in a corp that does that and didn't tell you about it, that would be very nice if you're in the enemy's HiSec, because you suddenly become a target for their navy. You do not need a letter of recommendation to join the militia, but it helps if you don't have 0.5 standing. You need either 0.5 standing or a letter of recommendation to join the militia. However, if you join a player-owned corporation, you need neither of those. So you can circumvent that mechanism by joining a player-owned corporation. Can you align for a? Can you sign up for a faction warfare corps that is not your own faction? In essence, joining the Calaria. So standing is, yeah, standing is all that's needed. It's either standing, a letter of recommendation, or joining a player-owned corp. Those are the three ways to get involved on the standing side. So the 0.5, letter of recommendation, or joining a player-owned corporation that is already in faction warfare. Also, if you mine in your friendly HiSec and you're in that very fancy Hulk, it might very well be that at some point you will get a visit from the enemy, especially if you do this close to border zones. That means that if you do this close to places where both either of your enemy factions also travel. So if you mine near a trade hub and you're in faction warfare, chances are you will get shot by the enemy. Even though it's friendly HiSec, they'll probe you down, send neutral alts your way or whatever, and shoot you. So there are some drawbacks even in your friendly HiSec. It's very exhilarating. Leaving faction warfare is done by joining up with any other corporation or joining any corporation that's not in faction warfare, or dropping below a certain level of standing. So if you drop below a certain level of standing with the faction you've actually joined to fight for, they will say, well, it's very nice if you want to fight for us, but we don't trust you anymore, and you are hereby kicked. Now this happens sometimes to people who, for instance, smart bomb in a militia fleet and hit a few friendly drones. If you do that, you'll lose a lot of standing all at once, and you'll be dropped from faction warfare. But that's only if you're in an NPC corporation. If you're in a player-owned corporation, it will impact your corp standing eventually. But mostly that's always repaired very swiftly by your corp mates. Traveling in enemy HiSec, dealing with the enemy navy. Traveling in enemy HiSec is very interesting because they do try to kill your ship. They won't shoot your pod, but they will try to kill your ship. So anything that aligns slowly will have trouble getting out of a 1.0 system. So out of a maximum security HiSec system, you'll have trouble getting out of that if you're not very fast in aligning. They will always web you first, so that really helps with the aligning. I think they did that, CCP did that on purpose to make sure that you're not shot down constantly when you miss a jump and find yourself suddenly in enemy HiSec. And as I said before, in a 0.5 system, you can attempt to tank the enemy navy. You'll need a good tank for this, though. But I've seen it done, and it's very nice to spend a day camping with that. So if E-UNI has a negative standing with Amar and I have a plus 1.5 standing with them, I will still be able to join on 24th Crusade side. Yes, that is correct. You will be able to join 24th Crusade. Because joining 24th Crusade is joining the NPC wing of Amarian faction warfare, and all that they check is whether or not your personal standing exceeds 0.5. or if you have the certificate of recommendation. So, the enemy navy, if you attempt to travel in their HISEC, they will try to shoot you. But, as said, that's only the navy. So, gate guns will leave you alone, as will Concord. It's purely the navy that tries to shoot you. Now, this is also done via a spawning mechanism. So they won't be there the moment you warp in. The moment you jump in the system, they won't be there unless somebody else has been there before you, and had the negative faction standing. So joining the opposite side works to give you a -5 standing for the enemy, and with that negative standing, they will try to shoot you. That being said, I've crossed enemy HISEC in stuff that aligns fast, and I've done it in tanked industrials, and as long as you make sure that you align relatively fast, you'll be okay. Unless you lag enormously, then they might catch you. I've lost, I think 1 or 2 industrials since joining faction warfare. And if you take into consideration that I fly around in industrials a lot, that's a very low amount. So the faction warfare complexes, I think I've handled those when I was talking about the CCP framework for faction warfare. Faction warfare missioning. This is by far one of the big attractions of faction warfare. It gives you a huge amount of stuff to do in low sec. Low sec is a very empty place most of the time, and everybody in low sec is out to kill you. That doesn't change when you join faction warfare, but if you stick to your friendly high sec, you'll find a lot of people that are flying around that are either friendly or trying to kill you. But the faction warfare missioning always puts you, when you're missioning, it always puts you on the opposite side. So you'll have you'll grab missions in friendly high sec and in friendly low sec. So low sec, that is that has the Tribal Liberation or 24th Crusade or State Protectorate or Federal Defense Union stations, and you can pick up missions there, and those missions will be executable in enemy low sec. So CCP basically said, if you want the huge payouts we give for people running our faction warfare missions, you're going to have to go to the place that is most dangerous for you, and that is the low sec enemy war zone. Now, if you go there, you'll find that a lot of the missions have certain restrictions on who can enter. I think it's frigates for level 1s, and it progresses from there. This means that as long as you're in the mission, you have a pretty clear picture of what can come in and what can't. But there's always the hard part of getting to the place. And they have a few types of missions. They have assassination missions where they ask you to kill certain ships or kill certain structures. They have missions where they ask you to kill and then retrieve certain items. The kind of mission that everybody does the most are the ones that don't require you to take anything back. And there's also a very special thing that applies, I think, only to faction warfare missions, and that is you can let them expire. So after accepting a mission, you can allow that mission to expire without any repercussions whatsoever. So you don't lose standing, you don't lose anything if you don't complete a mission. That's of course done to make sure that whenever you're having a very bad day, you can opt to not complete the mission. I'm pretty sure that if you decline twice in 4 hours that you will indeed lose standing for declining. I don't think they adjusted that mechanism. But basically, if you fly around and say I would like to do only kill missions, you can do that. There's no trouble in that. The reason for not taking taking missions that require you to retrieve a certain item is, of course, that low sec travel is pretty dangerous. You can at any point in time walk into a gate camp that will destroy your ship, and if they then take that item from you, you can't complete the mission, which is just a lot of hassle. My lowest empire standing is 2, and I joined faction. Will 2 of them immediately drop below 0? Yes. The standing decrease will take you to -5 with both the enemy factions. And even if you try your darndest to get above that, which is very hard if you're in faction warfare, it will always see you as the enemy. So even if you try and get above that, you'll still be marked out for killing. So the empires always view the enemy as -5. That is a temporary thing. So if you exit faction warfare, that severe negative standing drop that you got, that just ceases, that evaporates. So you can, if you only take to doing stuff that doesn't carry heavy penalties, you can actually just vacation in faction warfare. What you have to realize if you try and vacation in faction warfare, yes, you do indeed go back to your standings before you joined, but that's only if you did not run any complexes and if you did not run the faction warfare missions, because those two have a severe impact on how the friendly faction sees you, how the related friendly faction sees you. Actually, it's the complexes and the faction warfare missions are not the primary attraction of faction warfare. The primary attraction of faction warfare is the PvP. Most people that join faction warfare do so to have the relaxing PvP, the very casual PvP, the PvP that allows you to log on, run around, find a fight within 4 jumps, and then log off again. That's what a lot of faction warfare players look for. So what you see is a lot of the 0-0 players that burn out in 0-0 because of the call to arms and you have to be here then and then to fight. They join faction warfare to just relax and not be subject to, you have to fight because we're taking down a tower in our enemy system and you have to be there. Faction warfare is way more relaxed because, anyway, the Minmatar side is because nobody cares. You know, I mean, if you're not there, you won't catch any flack. I was talking about faction warfare missioning. Faction warfare missioning is so very popular because it carries very, very, very substantial rewards at increased risk from high-sec missioning, but the rewards are comparable. If you run level 4 missions, the rewards are comparable to running level 4 missions in high-sec. The ship types you can do that in are smaller, generally smaller than you would need to do a level 4 in high-sec for another corporation, and less ISK heavy, but they carry great rewards. For instance, the mission ship, the ship for running level 4 missions on the Minmatar side is a stealth bomber. That's the favorite mission ship for running level 4s. And you use the stealth bomber to both kite the aggression and shoot whatever target you've been given. Now, there are some targets you can't take down solo, but you learn to recognize the missions that you can't take down solo, and you can either avoid them or you can team up with corp mates or militia mates or friendlies and run the mission anyway. Because there are some enemies that have too much tank to take down, too much tank regeneration to take down solo in even a stealth bomber. But there are a lot of missions you can do solo. This is also brought with it specialist hunters. So on the Amar side, there are specialists who try to ruin your missioning, and that's basically what they want to do and what they set about doing. As I said, the rewards for faction warfare missioning are insane. They're just really, really, really rewarding. For instance, if you were to fly level 1 missions, you can do those level 1 missions in Rifters, which is, of course, because I'm in Matar, is something that I'm very familiar with, something that I love to use. You can do the level 1 missions in a Rifter, and you can shoot stuff in the level 1 mission. You can just basically run every level 1 mission on the Minmatar side in a Rifter. Okay, the chances of getting potted in factional warfare are about as high as you would meet in most war-type situations. So the moment you get shot down, before you get shot down even, you're spamming warp. You're trying to get away, and you're trying to save your pod. But it's PvP, and if you get attacked, it's an actual person on the other side doing the attacking. So that actual person will try his darndest to shoot down your pod, because they can do so without any standing hit. So that's something you have to consider when you join faction warfare. I'm getting a buzz somewhere. Oh, it's gone. So, as I said, the faction warfare missions are very lucrative. And that's also because the loyalty point stores for the factions have a significant discount on LP costs of the items that they offer up. So where, for instance, with any other corporation, you'd need about, I don't know, I think it's 600,000 loyalty points to buy into the faction battleship. For faction warfare, the cost of getting yourself in the faction battleship is reduced to, I think, 240,000 LPs. It's how much more ISK do you get compared to normal missioning? It's comparable to normal missioning, except for the fact that you can run the missions a lot faster. So one mission equals one faction warfare mission equals about the payout of a reasonable level 4 mission in for any other corp in HiSec. That's combat mission. But you can run those very fast. You can run the kill missions very fast. They take at max 10 minutes to run. So because you can run them that much faster, and because you can take on a lot of them without being fearful of not running them all in time, because of the fact that they don't carry a penalty if you don't do them. They are a lot more lucrative. I've heard stories tell of people racking up 20, 30, 40 missions in a night. So you can extrapolate from that how much ISK was made. I do think there are faction warfare exclusive LP rewards. I do think that's the case. I'm not sure what those are. What comes to mind is for instance, faction-specific drones that you can then try to sell on the open market. But yes, the mission levels do indeed range from 1 to 4. As far as I know, there are no level 5 missions in faction warfare. So you can't get up to level 5, but the level 4 missions in faction warfare are really nice and lucrative. Where was I? Faction warfare missioning and how lucrative they were. Yes. Okay, so are there any questions about the faction warfare missioning still? If you have a question, drop it in the lecture channel, please. If not, I'll move on to faction warfare roams and the cold shoulder. Okay, in faction warfare roams, faction warfare tends to be very, very paranoid about spies in general militia chat. General militia is a channel you get. This question that just came in is so I can shoot other faction warfare players only in those separated sites? No. You get to shoot other faction warfare players everywhere. Everywhere you encounter them, you can shoot and kill the opposite side without any security status repercussion for you. So, it's the moment you see an enemy, you can just open up. And it doesn't matter if they're in their pod, you can shoot the pod. No security status drop for you if you do that. Yes. So I can pod other player in 1.0 right before Concord's eyes. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. It's a war deck like you know a war deck. The only difference there are a few differences with other war decks, but you can pod other players in 1.0 security right before Concord's eyes, and Concord will not intervene because you are at war. They are blinky to you. They are legal targets. So, the moment you join faction warfare, Okay. If you kill other players through PvP, do you get standing increase? Yes, but a very marginal one. It's negligible. It's also one of the issues raised with faction warfare. Some people love that because it also means that the penalty for killing the enemy is negligible. That means that if you only do the PvP part of faction warfare, you can then drop back out of faction warfare and your standings will have shifted just marginally instead of shifted hugely, making it so that even after dropping faction warfare you can't really go into the enemy's high sec anymore because they still don't like you. And repairing those standings is a pain in the ass, so a lot of people do only the PvP. They do nothing else. They do just the PvP part of faction warfare. And they enjoy that immensely. So, the moment you join faction warfare, a militia channel opens up. It's comparable to the incursion channels that open up forcibly when you enter a place that has an incursion. I think it's a constellation that has an incursion. If you enter a place where they have an incursion, you see this chat channel open up that says incursion channel. Militia is the same. It opens up a militia-specific channel that is militia-specific to the faction you joined. So you can either have the Minmatar militia chat open, or if you join the Galente side, you can have the Galente. You get the Galente militia channel, and that goes for all of the 4 factions. They have their own militia channel. This is, of course, a channel that is not secure. It is a general channel that is very much unsecure. This is why that if you X up in that channel, if you look for fleets via that channel, you'll have a hard time. You'll have a really hard time because a lot of people won't take you into their fleet because they don't know you, they don't trust you, and the people that do indeed take you into their fleet might be the enemy that's looking to have to get an easy kill on your ship. So that has been a big problem for players just joining up militia, that they find themselves in a hostile chat channel. Because that's how most people view militia chat. They view it as a hostile channel where everybody that tries to do anything is trying to lure you into a trap and kill you. Now there are some people that are such staples of the faction warfare community that if they ask you to X up in militia chat, that if they ask to X up in militia chat, you'll suddenly see a flood of X's appear. That's a sign that the person that's asking it is a well-respected general militia fleet commander and is loved by his faction. So you can actually, in a very early stage, you can pick out who's a respected FC and who's not. So if you see somebody ask for X's in general militia chat, and he gets 2-3 X's, that's not a trustworthy party. If somebody asks for X's and gets 10, 20 X's, then that's a trusted party, and people like that person. Like that person as an FC, trust that person as a fleet commander. Now, that's been a huge problem for faction warfare. The fact that when you join faction warfare, this channel opens up, which is very new and exciting if you just join faction warfare, and everybody in that channel yells spy at every new person that tries to ask something. It is a hostile channel, and it's very hard to get past that if you've just joined Militia. It's very tough on people. So, if you want to join faction warfare, you are way better off selecting a corporation that's already established and joining that corporation, or selecting a few of your friends, making a corporation with them, and joining faction warfare as that corporation. It really depends on what style of play you would like and how much help you'd like in getting into faction warfare. If you join an established and well-known corporation, they'll help you along, or they won't, depending on the corp you join. But what you buy into when you join a corp is you buy into their complete set of connections in faction warfare. And a corporation that has consistently performed well in faction warfare will have a lot of those connections for you to use. So it's that's a way of circumventing that hostile militia channel. I think that also covers Spies and why people yell this a lot in militia chat for a large portion. People yell Spies a lot in militia chat because there are a lot of spies in general militia chat. And you have to be aware of this if you join militia, and you have to be ready for this, and you have to be very careful of that. Because if somebody asks for X's and only 2-3 people X up, they're untrustworthy. And if you join their fleet, you either have a very good time and kill a lot of stuff, or you inexplicably get found out by a much larger enemy fleet and killed instantly. It's a roll of the dice, and you don't know which way is up until you actually roll the dice. Then we move on to metagaming and faction warfare. There is actually quite a bit of metagaming going on in faction warfare. But it's nowhere near the level of complexity that you would encounter in 0-0. Metagaming is, for those of you that don't know, metagaming is playing a game within the game. Spies are, for instance, a way of metagaming. Metagaming is infiltrating a unfriendly corporation and destroying it from within. Metagaming is playing a game within a game. Yes. So metagaming is on a much lower level in faction warfare than it is in 0-0. You will encounter people that are metagaming. You will not at first know who they are, but as you see their behaviors, it'll become more apparent to you if you have an eye for it. And if you don't have an eye for it, don't worry about it. Just make sure you're in a corporation that has people that know what to look for, and you'll never be severely inconvenienced by metagamers. What you see a lot of when you're in faction warfare and you start to make some kills is that people start war decking you. This is actually either paid for by the enemy faction, by corporations in the enemy faction, or individuals in the enemy faction that want to inconvenience the corporation you're in. I'm talking player-owned corporations, by the way, that want to inconvenience the corporation you're in by disrupting your freedom in HiSec. because that is mostly the playground of war decking griefers. It's high sec. What you should always check for when you get war decked by high sec griefers is, what can I do to do whatever I want without them finding me in high sec? And the brilliant thing about faction warfare is that it takes you into low sec. Low sec becomes your playground, and with it, everybody that has the purple star that you get when somebody's in your militia, everybody that has a purple star is mostly friendly. That means that if you get shot by somebody who's followed you into low sec, your militia will do its darndest to kill whoever's attacking you if they like you enough. So when my corporation, for instance, comes under war deck, and the war decking corp is adventurous enough to enter low sec, which most aren't, they find that we don't fly alone. They find that we have a huge network of friendlies to rely upon and to call upon, and that's very very relaxing, because you have a way of getting away from enemy from griefers, because that's mostly what high sec war decking corps are. They're mostly just out to get easy kills. And what happens in faction warfare low sec, they find that there are no easy kills, because sure, they can track you down, but then what? They will have to open fire on you, and if they open fire on you, they don't know what they're going to encounter, because they're on your turf. You know that neck of the woods better than they do, and they'll lose their ship more often than not. Even though you might lose your ship, I mean, they still have to get away and get back. So that's a very good way to up the ante for any corporation that comes your way. Just duck low sec and do some faction warfare missions. Restrictions on corporations in faction warfare. The no alliance membership restriction. Now, this is a restriction that was placed on faction warfare by CCP to make sure that there would be no huge power blocks entering faction warfare. I have mixed feelings about that restriction, because it would be very convenient to join up with to form an alliance with friendly militia corporations and have that extra layer of friendliness. But on the other side, we're all already in the Minmatar faction, which is viewed as an alliance by CCP. Except that if you shoot an alliance member, so if you shoot somebody that's purple to you, what will happen is you lose standing, because you're essentially shooting a friendly. So to recap, if you're a corporation in faction warfare, you cannot join an alliance without also dropping from faction warfare. It will not allow any alliance into faction warfare. Now, why nobody ever wins faction warfare? And this is a question in the same category as why nobody ever loses faction warfare. There is very little to gain and very little to lose. The only thing to lose and to gain is bragging rights. That's that's the extent of the framework that CCP put into place, and that's the extent of play that we get out of faction warfare on a let's set ourselves a goal level. So you can't win, you can't lose. So everybody who is in faction warfare is in faction warfare to shoot, or to do or to gain. Yes, there was a brief period when Kaldari controlled all the contested territory, but all they got was a shiny medal, if I recall correctly, which is bragging rights, which has no influence on the game at all. So it's basically a monocle. Yeah, it's indeed great for role players, but it doesn't really interest the rest of EVE. So if you're not a role player, that doesn't really interest you, which makes the base for bunker bashing, which is very boring, unless you get a fight. So yeah, that's bunker bashing is that's the way you flip system occupancy. You just sit in space in low sec and shoot the. In my case, we shoot the Amar control bunker, and then after we've shot it enough, it sounds. It flips over to a Minmatar control bunker, which is indeed very, very boring. The thing is, this used to be a way to get fights out of the other side, because you're bothering their bragging rights. So what they'll do is they'll mount up a defense and make a big show out of it and come gunning for you. But that's the only reason that that non-role players shoot bunkers, is to get fights. And if a fight doesn't happen, they're pretty much bummed. It's not something they sign up for. If you want to bust a stationary target, you join a 0-0 alliance and start shooting towers. So that's a big oversight on CCP's part, that they managed to take the boring tower shooting and make it even less interesting a mechanism in faction warfare. That's amazing that they've managed to do that. Yes, indeed, it's super boring. It doesn't do anything. There is no added perks for shooting down the enemy bunker. So the only reason to do that, if from a non-role player perspective, is to shoot the bunker because you're hoping the enemy comes out to shoot at you. And if they don't show up, you're bummed. The next item I have on my list is corporations in faction warfare. In lectures following this, I'll try to have speakers for the guest speakers of corporations that are interesting, and I will try to get guest speakers from every faction. Right now, we have one of my corp mates here in this chat. I don't know if he's available.
So I joined the Hoplite brigade after 1 or 2 months of games in EVE. I was only a Kaver, and I started a really nice adventure with Autocannon Anonymous. I started as basically a researcher, because I'm interested in exploring. I was interested in exploring and research. But I suddenly start to PvP. I remember first times my legs shakes when I was in a fleet in a combat, and now I'm both doing research and PvP combat. basically. And Autocannon Anonymous is raising up in the last few months. We are in the last 3 or 4 months. We were the top killers in the Minmatar Militia, and I think this corp is great because we have researchers, producers, a lot of combat players, and I'm learning very fast the gameplay and the faction war stuff. And is there a question? I do not have your chat cover.
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask us anything, now would be the time.
Just a few things about the bunker. I shoot several bunkers in my faction war experience, and basically the bunkers are for let a system became contested, and this DMR in the last few months. And when you conquer a system, you can have your base there, and you can let your enemy open up the dead zone for the faction war. So I don't know why a lot of people in faction war needs to conquer more and more systems, but it works. You have to shoot a bunker, and then you have to run the mission in there.
Are there any questions, people? Feel free to ask us anything. Recruitment is never closed. We just say it is.
And Kaver, I have another things to say about the ISAC, the enemy ISAC. I was in several rooms in Amar ISAC with a Thrasher fleet, a destroyer fleet with arty cannons, and we get caught by police, but we were not scrammed or webbed. We just take the shoots from the police, but it's very fun because Amar faction war people didn't expect an enemy fleet in their own system, and it's very fun, and you can shoot battle cruisers and down very easily.
Yeah, Aga, I invited you to the relevant chat channel, and I'm going to try and answer the questions one by one. Is faction warfare a good way of life in EVE? In my opinion, it is. I've had a lot of fun in faction warfare. Even when you got 3 incoming war decks, and HiSec has become an absolute puddle of piss for you, you can still jump into low sec and have fun with everybody without much risk, other than the usual risk that you run when you get into HiSec as a faction warfare player. So yeah, it's a very good way of life for us.
Yes, I think so. But basically, I was interested in PvP, and after a few days, I joined Autocannon Anonymous and Faction War, Militia Faction War. I found a lot of fleets, frigate fleets. The fleet commander didn't care about your skill points or your ability, and they can introduce you in faction war. They can teach you a lot of stuff. I learned how to PvP, how to avoid combat, how to fit my ship very fast, very quickly, and this is the most important. This was the most important thing for me. And I have some questions. Something fixed or wrong in faction war. The mission and the bunker and the conquest system is very boring. Maybe something has to be fixed there. And another thing, you can very quickly earn ISKs and staff running faction war missions, because in 3 hours of gameplay you can get 300 a plex. You can get a plex in 3 hours of gameplay. So this is very is cool, and you can get ISK and get more ships and lose ships during combat, because in the first time I joined the faction war, I lost 1,000 drifters and ruptures and stabbers, and then I start to lose typhoons, and you have to make ISK, and then you have to build stuff, and then you have to lose stuff. So I have how active are Russians? Russians are active in the Heck pipe from Heck to Dal. They are very, they fly always in a big group with battleships. It's annoying. Yeah, they are annoying. Do you keep faction war rank to show after you leave? I can't respond to this question. Can you do it, Kaver?
Yes, you keep your rank, but it doesn't show anymore. It will start showing up again if you rejoin faction warfare on the side that you acquired your rank at. So it's something that you have acquired, and the faction standing gain that went with your promotion will carry over to your normal EVE life. But the actual rank won't show anymore after you leave faction warfare. It's a way that you can check if somebody is in faction warfare for the other side. At Leonidas, is there a language requirement? That depends. A lot of corporations ask for a working knowledge of English, but there are also a lot of corporations that don't have that requirement, that have a different language that you should be familiar with. And it depends on the corporation, on how active the Russians are in faction warfare. I haven't really encountered that much Russians in faction warfare.
Oh yes, there is a Russian corporation around Evati, Adozico. They're mostly pirates, and they join faction war. So sometimes pirates get bored and join the faction war. I know an Italian corporation too. They are mostly pirates, but sometimes they join Minmatar Militia. They run lots of missions. They earn ISKs, and they leave and they come back to be pirates. The corporation name is they are friends, because I'm Italian. Chupacabras, Los Chupacabras.
But as I remember, those are more pirates than they actually are in faction warfare.
Sometimes they join militia, and sometimes they left. I'm around Adozico and Devati very often, and they are red sometimes and purple other times.
Quanpo asked the question, so would you say faction warfare is something you turn to once you're bored with HiSec and don't plan on returning? No. Faction warfare is something you turn to when you want the excitement of fighting in fleets and fighting and in small roaming gangs and soloing, while you have a stable ISK printing machine, that is the faction warfare mission system. So you can keep up the flying in shiny ships, and actually losing a lot of shiny ships. Entering faction warfare does not prohibit you from entering HiSec. It inconveniences you when you want to enter enemy HiSec, and that inconvenience part is something you can get around. The biggest issue that Minmatar and Galente corporations have is that JITA is in enemy territory, and this is solved by neutral alts that do not have the problem of JITA being in enemy territory. But it's not something that you do when you want to leave HiSec. If you want to leave HiSec because you're bored with it, you go Pi, you go Pirate Corporation and Flashy Red. You can go Flashy Red in faction warfare, and you can do that while most of Militia will still not shoot you, because they've set their overview properly and respect the fact that you shoot at anything that moves except friendlies. For Thomas, maybe I missed the info. No, you didn't. Can one player run faction warfare while being in a corporation that is not involved in faction warfare? Short answer is no. You can't do that. You have to be in a corporation that is involved in faction warfare, or you cannot run anything that has to do with faction warfare, except maybe shooting faction warfare people as a neutral. Are there any more questions?
I can tell a few more infos about Autocannon Anonymous. We have do you guys complete in incursions? Sometimes when the faction war zone is empty of enemies, we build up a battleship fleet, and sometimes we run an incursion, but it's very rare. And there is no relationship between being a pirate and being a faction war. When you join a faction war, you join an army, and you start fight for that. And sometimes you encounter a lot of friends, militia friends that are reds, but it's very rare, because it's very important to have an high security status in a faction war, because most of the time the fleets are composed with logistic ships. And if you are a Pi, or if you are red, and your friend try to repair your ship during a combat, he gets the guns. He becomes he lost the security status. He go GCC, a global secure countdown. And it's very important in a fleet not to have a Pi, because it can break your logistic ships, and you lose the field very quickly. Global criminal countdown. So most of the time the fleet are composed with logistic for shields or armor. And this is very important, because in the last few months I encountered only fleets, a Marian fleet with guardians, minimum 3, and is a pain in the ass to have a couple of battleships, red, that you can't repair, and you lose the field in few minutes. And this is the reason why a lot of players in Militia, when they drop their security status, they have to raise up running killing rats in nullsec to raise up quickly the security status.
So to recap, you can be in faction warfare and be a pirate. You can be in faction warfare and be a Care Bear. Faction warfare doesn't care. However, to function properly in faction warfare, it really helps if you're not all the way flashy red.
Yes, if you are flashy red, and sometimes people didn't fix the overview, you take shoots from everyone in low sec because they see you as a flashy red and they didn't fix their overview. In my first days in faction war, I lost a lot of ships against a Militia friend, but my overview wasn't fixed, so it was my fault. But I think it was their fault, because if you are in a faction war, it's better if your security status is high.
That being said, I do know a lot of militia members who are also deep flashy red, because they just shoot anything and everything. Are there any further questions? Since there do not seem to be any further questions, I would like to thank everybody to... Oh, there's an Italian question, I think. You're very welcome. I'll be doing this 7 more times, every time on a 6 on Mondays. And I will try to have interesting guests on that can further iterate on everything that faction warfare has to offer. Well, if you all could think of topics you want me to cover, I will certainly take that into account. You can send me an email with topics you'd want handled. So email anything you want to know more about to me, and I'll take it with me on my next lecture. And well, that concludes this lecture. I would like to thank you all for listening.